The year is 1944 and the end of World War II is in sight. The Soviets and Americans are racing to capture Berlin and the Cold War is already beginning to take shape. Europe was either going to come under Soviet occupation or become a vassal of the United States. In a small American town called Bretton Woods, 730 representatives from 44 countries negotiated a new set of rules, procedures and regulations to craft a new monetary system. For Washington, this was a historic opportunity to claim the mantle of leadership and design a new world order. I'm your host, James, and welcome to Academic Ace. So much has been said about the world order that to say anything more would be repetitive. But talk about it, we must. Prior to Bretton Woods, most countries subscribed to the gold standard, where each government guaranteed that it would redeem its currency for its value in gold. The practice had its ups and downs. The gold standard rewarded productive nations because they received gold whenever they exported goods. On the other hand, it tied the economy to the supply of gold and not on the resourcefulness of people and businesses. At the time of the Bretton Woods negotiations, Washington held 3/4 of the world's supply of gold. No other country had enough gold to make its currency work. Hence, under the Bretton Woods, the dollar was packed to gold at a fixed rate while all other foreign currencies were pegged to the American dollar. One could therefore convert French franc into dollars and then the dollars to gold. If the value of the franc became too weak relative to the dollar, the French central bank could buy its currency and foreign exchange markets, which would lower the supply of the franc and raise its value. This was the gist of the Bretton Woods monetary system. The global economy could not have recovered so rapidly had the United States not agreed to this transition. This is not to say that Washington made his sacrifice for the sake of global prosperity by shifting from gold to dollar. America, the only country with the ability to print dollars, emerged as a universal bank. The United States gained short-term liabilities since everyone was using the dollar to trade internationally, but Washington also earned long-term assets because the dollar was effectively loaned to the rest of the world. Emboldened by the faith of the global community, the American economy and industrial capacity expanded in size and reach. The rest of the world was not so fortunate. In Europe, self-funded reconstruction was out of the question. The Bombay campaign during World War II had leveled most of West Europe's infrastructure and industrial capacity. With almost nothing left from which to rebuild and strapped with debt, Europe was in desperate need of imports. At this point in history, the United States did something unusual. It allowed the European economies near tariff-free access to the American market while turning a blind eye to Europe's own tariffs. Next, a pair of institutions known today as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization were established to lend money to stimulate GDP growth in West Europe. Subsequently, the imports, which Europe so desperately needed, were shipped across the Atlantic under the protection of the U.S. Navy, the only blue water force that could guarantee the transition. So immediately after the World War, France, for instance, sought for ways to rebuild itself, but its infrastructure and industrial capacity was insufficient. The only course of action was to import goods, materials, machinery, etc. from the United States. However, importing such necessities could only be done by claiming a dollar-denominated loan from the IMF or the World Bank. Afterwards, the transportation of those imports came under the supervision of the U.S. Navy. Everything in this system, from the imports, the currency, the institutions to the maritime routes, was firmly dominated by Washington. Once Europe at American aid, Washington became a trading partner of first and last resort. And the arrangement worked remarkably. By the mid-1950s, The Bretton Woods was extended to any state involved on the American side of the Cold War, including Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, etc. In exchange, the participating nations granted the United States say in crafting foreign policy. NATO emerged as the institution through which America's global security policy was pursued. And this was the hard power component of the Bretton Woods, one that is often overlooked. So ironically, the free world consisted not of the League of Equal Nations, but of the United States and everyone else. This may sound like a malevolent scheme, but the shattered post-World War nations had nothing to complain about. Their economies were covered, poverty dropped, and communism never gained a foothold. What's more is that the monetary and security components of the Bretton Woods allowed for global trade to flourish. Consider for a moment how odd modern international trade is. In the past, if France wanted to export cotton to Japan, the French would have needed a formidable blue water navy that has skirted to merchant vessels. The costs of such a fleet discouraged business across long distances. And that is how nations traded with overseas markets. One had to have a navy. Ottoman galleys escorted Ottoman merchant ships and British frigates escorted British ships. Such was the case of international trade for all human history. Bretton Woods changed all that. Since the U.S. Navy guaranteed access to the oceans, it was no longer necessary to operate an expensive navy to do business internationally. There was no need for large fleets. Washington had taken on that burden. As a result, intercontinental trade climbed to unprecedented levels. Any nation seeking to do business across the oceans had a vested interest in collaborating with the United States. The icing on the cake was that they did so voluntarily. Nobody forced Japan to ally itself with the United States. Tokyo did so and still does because they needed ocean-going access that only the U.S. Navy could provide. The same applies to the United Kingdom, Australia and most of the Britain with nations. Pursuing a policy that did not suit the interests of Washington was senseless. Paris and London that had the hard way when they tried to re-establish their colonial hold over Egypt in 1956 only to be met by a disapproving U.S. fleet. This distressing encounter cemented the downfall of European navies. No longer could Europe hold policies independent of Washington. In the 1970s, an unforeseen complication triggered the collapse of the monetary order. What happened is that the demand for the dollar began to swiftly increase relative to other currencies. However, as the U.S. government kept printing dollars, the value in gold remained the same. That meant that the real value of gold was undervalued. When Richard Nixon came to office, he inherited an economy that was suffering from inflation and recession. Part of the crisis was due to the dollar's role as the global reserve. As such, President Nixon started to gradually deflate the dollar's value and go. When the global community got hold of this, the plan backfired. Investors and governments redeemed the devaluing dollars for gold at an unprecedented pace. By 1973, the run on the U.S. gold reserves had hurt the United States to such an extent that Nixon unhooked the value of the dollar from gold altogether. From that year forward, currencies all over the world were floating. Under these circumstances, market forces established the forex, a medium where currencies were bought, sold, and exchanged at current or determined prices. Most analysts point to the dollar's divorce from gold as the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. That is partially true. Organizations like the IMF and the World Bank are not only loaded with controversies, but they have also proven to be irrelevant to modern economic problems and even failed to prevent the 2008 crash. But even if the monetary order no longer exists, the security arrangements have all persisted to this day. The art of the deal is that the world order is based on voluntary participation because the benefits outweigh the risks. However, as the burden becomes too heavy for Washington to bear alone, the Americans are increasingly looking for an escape, which may yet dismantle the world order. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please like, share and subscribe.